Hello, my friend, and welcome. Tonight, let your shoulders drop, let your eyelids grow heavy, and let your breathing slow all the way down because tonight we are going to travel together across an entire continent and through the whole long, warm sweep of human time. Tonight, we tell the entire story of Africa, from the very first footprints in the ancient soil, all the way to the bright lights of its modern cities. There is no need to remember anything. There is no need to hold on to any of it. Just let the words wash over you like a slow river at dusk, and if you drift off before we finish, that is exactly as it should be. I will still be here, speaking softly when you wake. Chapter 1: The Cradle of Humanity. Long, long ago, before there were any cities, before there were any kingdoms, before there were even any words to describe the world, there was Africa. It is a strange and beautiful thing to consider, my friend, that every single person who has ever lived, every person you have ever loved, every person you will ever meet, can trace their story back to this one continent. Africa is not just a place on a map. It is the beginning of all of us. Picture, if you will, the Great Rift Valley, a long, gentle scar running down the eastern side of the continent, where the earth itself is slowly pulling apart. So slowly that in a single human lifetime you would never notice it moving at all. Millions of years ago, in the shade of ancient acacia trees, along lakes that glimmered pink with flamingos, our earliest ancestors began to stand upright. Imagine the first time one of them looked out over the tall grass, above the height of the grass itself, and saw the horizon stretching out in every direction. That single moment, repeated and refined over unimaginable stretches of time, changed everything that would ever come after. In a place called Olduvai Gorge, in what is now Tanzania, and in the dusty hills of the Afar region in Ethiopia, and in the caves of South Africa, the bones of these early relatives of ours have been resting quietly in the earth for ages beyond counting. A famous skeleton found in Ethiopia was given the gentle name Lucy, and when she walked the earth more than 3 million years ago, she stood a little over 3 feet tall, and she carried within her small frame the very first hints of the long walk toward everything we would become. She did not know she was making history. She was simply living her life, day by day, under the same African sun that still rises this morning. Slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, softly as a tide coming in and going out again and again, bodies changed, and minds changed. Hands became more skilled, learning to shape stones into simple tools, sharp enough to cut through hide and flesh. Voices, in time, learned to shape sounds into something like language. Soft murmurs passed from parent to child around a fire that itself was a new and wondrous discovery. Fire meant warmth in the cool African nights. Fire meant safety from the great cats and hyenas that prowled the darkness. Fire meant a circle of light where stories could finally begin to be told, perhaps stories not so very different from the one I am telling you now. And then, my friend, something remarkable happened. Groups of these early humans, our own direct ancestors, began to walk, not just across a valley or over a hill, but out of Africa entirely, across land bridges and along coastlines, into what we now call the Middle East, and from there into Asia and into Europe, and eventually, many thousands of years later, across frozen seas into the Americas. Every wandering people who ever crossed a mountain range, every sailor who ever crossed an ocean, was walking a path that had first been walked by feet on African soil. This is why historians and scientists alike often call Africa the cradle of humanity. A cradle is where you begin. It is where you are held before you are ready to stand on your own. And Africa held all of us gently in the very beginning. But of course, not everyone left. Many stayed, and their children stayed, and their children's children stayed, for generation after patient generation, learning the rhythms of their particular corner of this vast and varied continent. And what a continent it is, my friend. Let your mind drift now over its shape, wide and warm at the top where the Sahara stretches out like a golden sea of sand, narrowing gently as it moves south, past great rivers and ancient forests, until it tapers to a cooler, quieter point at the very bottom, where two oceans meet. In the millennia that followed, small bands of hunters and gatherers slowly became something new. Along the banks of great rivers, and in fertile valleys where rain fell reliably enough to trust the soil, people began to notice something remarkable. If you took the seeds of certain grasses and placed them carefully in the earth, and returned to that same patch of ground later, food would be waiting for you, food that you yourself had called into being. This was the beginning of farming, and it changed the pace of everything. When you no longer need to wander constantly in search of food, you can begin to stay in one place. When you stay in one place, you can build something that lasts longer than a season. You can build a home. You can build a village. And in time, quietly, gradually, almost too slowly to notice, a village can grow into something more. In the valley of a certain great river, one of the longest in the entire world, this transformation would soon give rise to one of the most extraordinary civilizations humanity has ever known. But that, my friend, is a story for our next chapter. For now, simply rest here, in this early, gentle chapter of human time, among the acacia trees and the cooling fires, among the first footprints and the first words ever spoken. Rest and know that this is where your story, and my story, and every story first began. We will continue our journey together, chapter by chapter, night by night, all the way from these ancient beginnings to the modern nations of today. For now, close your eyes and let Africa's oldest lullaby carry you gently into sleep. Chapter 2: The Gift of the River. Now, my friend, let your mind drift north, up along the length of a great river, the longest river in the world, winding its way through desert sands like a long green ribbon laid gently across the dry land. This is the Nile, and it does something rivers rarely do so generously. Once every year, in the old days before dams and modern engineering, it would rise up over its banks and spread a thin, dark layer of rich, fertile mud across the fields on either side. When the waters drew back again, they left behind soil so good, so full of nourishment, that almost anything could grow in it. The people who lived along its banks came to depend on this yearly gift so completely that a wise traveler from Greece would later call the whole land simply the gift of the river. It was here, along the Nile, more than 5,000 years ago, that villages began to grow into something the world had rarely seen before. Two lands slowly took shape, one stretching along the narrow valley to the south, which the people called Upper Egypt, and one spreading out into the wide, marshy delta to the north, where the river fans out into the sea, called Lower Egypt. For a long while these two lands lived apart, each with its own customs, its own leaders, its own quiet rhythms of planting and harvest. Then, so the old stories tell us, a king remembered by the name Narmer, or perhaps by another name lost now to time, united these two lands into one. He is shown in ancient carvings wearing a tall white crown for the south, and in other images, a red crown for the north, and eventually the two crowns were combined into one, a double crown to mark a single, unified kingdom. This moment, when Upper and Lower Egypt became one, is often remembered as the true beginning of one of the longest-lasting civilizations human beings have ever built. It would rise and fall and rise again, and yet endure, in one form or another, for over 3,000 years. 3,000 years, my friend. Let that settle over you for a moment. If we stood today at the same distance from the founding of the American nation as ancient Egypt's civilization lasted from its beginning to its end, we would need to imagine 15 such nations, one after another, stretching back into the mist of time. The rulers of this unified land came to be called pharaohs, and the people believed them to be something more than ordinary men and women, a living bridge between the gods above and the fields and rivers below. A pharaoh's most important task, above all others, was to maintain something the Egyptians called Ma'at, a word that meant balance, order, truth, and harmony all at once. As long as Ma'at was kept, the sun would rise each morning. The Nile would flood each year, and the world would continue turning as it should. It was in service of this belief, and in preparation for a life the Egyptians believed continued on after death, that some of the most astonishing structures ever built by human hands rose up from the desert sand. Picture, if you can, the plain at Giza, just outside the bustle of what is now Cairo, in the early morning light. 3 great pyramids stand there, the largest of them built for a pharaoh named Khufu, constructed from over 2 million blocks of stone, some of them weighing as much as several elephants. Each one cut, moved, and set into place by teams of skilled workers using nothing but ropes, wooden sledges, ramps, and an extraordinary understanding of engineering that still leaves modern experts quietly amazed. For thousands of years, the Great Pyramid of Giza was the tallest structure ever built anywhere on Earth, and it held that record longer than any building has held it since. But Egypt was never only about its monuments to the dead. It was also, gloriously, a civilization deeply in love with life. Along the riverbanks, farmers grew wheat and barley and flax. Fishermen cast their nets into waters full of fish, and hunters pursued waterfowl through the tall papyrus reeds. Craftsmen shaped gold into jewelry so fine that it still dazzles in museum cases today. Scribes, trained for years in a school called the House of Life, learned to write in a beautiful picture language we now call hieroglyphics, pressing reed pens dipped in ink onto sheets made from the papyrus plant itself, the very same plant that gives us our word for paper. The Egyptians told stories about their gods with the same warmth and familiarity you might use to describe a favorite relative. There was Ra, the sun god, sailing his boat across the sky each day and through the dangerous underworld each night. There was Isis, devoted and clever, who gathered the scattered pieces of her husband Osiris and brought him back from death long enough to conceive their son Horus. There was Anubis, with the head of a jackal, who guided the souls of the dead and weighed their hearts against a single feather to determine whether they had lived a life of balance and truth. Over the centuries, Egypt saw great pharaohs come and go. There was Hatshepsut, a woman who ruled as pharaoh in her own right, dressing at times in the ceremonial false beard of kingship, and who sent trading expeditions far south to a land called Punt, returning with incense, ivory, and even live myrrh trees to plant in her own temple gardens. There was Akhenaten, who tried, briefly and dramatically, to convince his people to worship only a single god, the sun disk called the Aten, before the old ways quietly returned after his death. There was his young successor, a boy king named Tutankhamun, who ruled only a short while and died young, and who would remain almost entirely forgotten by history until, thousands of years later, in the year 1922, his small, largely intact tomb was uncovered, still gleaming with golden treasures, giving the modern world one of its most breathtaking glimpses into this ancient way of life. And there was Rameses II, sometimes called Rameses the Great, who ruled for an astonishing 66 years, who built more monuments than perhaps any other pharaoh, and who fought a famous battle at a place called Kadesh, a battle so significant that it produced what may be the oldest surviving peace treaty in human history, carved in stone in 2 languages by 2 ancient empires who had finally decided that peace was worth more than further war. Slowly, gently, let yourself imagine standing on the deck of a small wooden boat, drifting down the Nile at sunset, the water turning gold and pink, farmers waving from the fields, temple pylons rising in the distance, the calls of ibis birds drifting across the water. This was daily life for millions of people across thousands of years, generation after generation living beside the same river, worshiping the same gods, watching the same yearly flood, secure in the belief that as long as Ma'at was kept, this rhythm would continue forever. Of course, nothing lasts entirely unchanged forever, and in time new peoples and new powers would come to the Nile Valley, from Nubia to the south, and later from Persia and Greece and Rome, each layering their own chapter onto Egypt's long story. But we will come to all of that gently, in its own time. For now, let the image of the river settle into your mind, wide and slow and endlessly patient, carrying its rich dark mud to the fields year after year after year, exactly as it did for the men and women who built pyramids and told stories about the sun. Rest now in the warmth of that ancient river valley, my friend. There is so much more of this story still to come, and we have all the time in the world to tell it, one gentle chapter at a time. Chapter 3: Nubia and the Kingdom of Kush. Let us drift now a little further south along the Nile, my friend, past the point where the river narrows and tumbles over rocky rapids the ancient world called cataracts. Here, in the land the Egyptians knew as Nubia and modern maps now place mostly within Sudan, another great civilization grew up beside the same generous river, one that lived for thousands of years alongside Egypt, sometimes as a trading partner, sometimes as a rival, and once, remarkably, as its ruler. The Nubians were skilled and proud people long before anyone wrote their history down in a way that survives today. Their land was rich with gold, so much so that the very name Nubia may come from an ancient word for that precious metal. Traders came from the north seeking not only gold but ebony, ivory, incense, and even the exotic animals that fascinated the pharaohs, including leopards and giraffes led on ropes along dusty trade roads toward the Egyptian court. In exchange, Egyptian goods flowed south, and over centuries the two cultures wove themselves together, borrowing gods, art, and architecture from each other, while each still remained distinctly itself. For a long while, Egypt was the stronger of the two, and Egyptian pharaohs sent armies south to control the Nubian gold mines and trade routes, building fortresses along the river to guard their interests. Yet Nubia was patient, and its own kingdoms grew wealthier and stronger over time. Around the city of Napata, near the fourth cataract of the Nile, a Nubian kingdom called Kush rose to real power. And then, in a turn of events that must have astonished the ancient world, the Kushite kings did something no one expected. They marched north, into Egypt itself, and made themselves pharaohs. This was the 25th dynasty of Egypt, a line of Nubian kings who ruled the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt with real devotion to Egyptian tradition, restoring old temples, honoring old gods, and even building their own pyramids, smaller and steeper than the ancient ones at Giza, but built with the same reverence. One of these kings, Pi, is remembered for a striking quality. In a time when conquest was often brutal, he insisted that his soldiers approach their campaigns with ritual purity and restraint, and he cared more for demonstrating that he was a proper, pious pharaoh than for simply crushing his enemies. His victory stone, carved with a long account of his campaign, still stands today as one of the most vivid pieces of writing to survive from ancient Africa. Eventually, pressures from the Assyrian Empire pushed the Kushite kings back south, out of Egypt and toward their homeland. But rather than fading away, the kingdom of Kush simply moved its center further south still, to a city called Meroe, nestled where the river bends through wide grasslands rather than narrow desert cliffs. And here, my friend, something new and wonderful bloomed. Meroe became famous throughout the ancient world for its ironworking. The hills nearby were rich in iron ore, and forests provided the charcoal needed for the furnaces. And so Meroe became one of the great iron-producing centers of the ancient world, its blacksmiths shaping tools and weapons that were traded far and wide. Some historians have even called Meroe the Birmingham of ancient Africa, a nod to the great ironworking city of England much later in history. Piles of ancient slag, the waste left over from iron smelting, still rise like small dark hills around the ruins of Meroe today, silent evidence of furnaces that once glowed through the night. The people of Meroe also developed their own way of writing, a script quite different from Egyptian hieroglyphics, used to record their own language, a language linguists still work patiently to fully understand even now, so many centuries later. Their queens, remembered by the royal title Candace, sometimes rendered in later times as Candace, ruled with real authority. And some led armies in their own right. One such queen is remembered for confronting the might of Rome itself, when Roman forces pushed south into Kushite territory. And though the fighting was fierce on both sides, the two powers eventually agreed to a peace, an unusual and remarkable outcome for a conflict with Imperial Rome, which so rarely negotiated as an equal. Field after field of small, steep pyramids still stand today at Meroe, over 200 of them clustered together in the desert, smaller than their Egyptian cousins, but no less full of meaning to the people who built them. For a very long while, these Nubian and Kushite achievements were overlooked or minimized by historians who focused their attention almost entirely on Egypt to the north. But slowly, patiently, over the last century, archaeologists and historians have come to understand what the Nubians always knew about themselves, that theirs too was a sophisticated, powerful, and enduring African civilization, one that shaped and was shaped by its northern neighbor, but that always kept its own proud identity. Let yourself imagine for a moment the quiet hills around Meroe at night, the glow of iron furnaces dimming to embers, the stars spread thick and bright over the grasslands, a queen's guard standing watch near pyramids already old, with the Nile murmuring along nearby, indifferent to empires, carrying its water onward exactly as it always had. Kush would eventually fade, worn down over centuries by shifting trade routes, changing climate, and the rise of new powers, including a kingdom we will meet very soon, called Aksum. But its long centuries of gold, iron, and quiet queens deserve to be remembered clearly, as one of the many bright threads woven into Africa's very long story. Rest gently now, my friend, among the small dark pyramids of Meroe. Our journey is only just beginning, and there is a whole continent still to explore together, one soft chapter at a time. Chapter 4: Aksum and the Land of Frankincense. Now let your mind travel east and south, my friend, into the highlands of what is today Ethiopia and Eritrea, where cool mountain air replaces the heat of the desert, and where terraced fields climb up hillsides thick with mist in the early morning. It was here, in the centuries before and after the birth of Christ, that a kingdom called Aksum grew into one of the great trading powers of the ancient world, a kingdom so respected in its time that a Persian writer once listed it among the 4 greatest civilizations on earth, alongside Persia itself, Rome, and China. Aksum's fortune rested on its extraordinary location. It sat close to the Red Sea, at a crossroads where goods from Africa, Arabia, India, and the Mediterranean world all passed through on their way to somewhere else. Through the bustling port of Adulis, Aksum exported ivory, gold, tortoise shell, and above all, the fragrant resins frankincense and myrrh, gathered from hardy trees that grew in the dry hills nearby. These resins were burned as incense in temples and homes from Rome to India, and Aksum's merchants grew wealthy, supplying a world hungry for their sweet, smoky scent. The kings of Aksum expressed their power in a truly unique way, through towering stone monuments called stelae, single, enormous pieces of granite carved to resemble tall, narrow buildings, complete with false doors and false windows, standing on end like giant fingers pointing toward the sky. The largest of these ever successfully raised stands over 70 feet tall, and an even larger one, over 100 feet, was attempted but broke during construction or erection, and still lies today in pieces near the place it fell, a humbling reminder of just how ambitious these ancient builders truly were. These stelae marked the tombs of kings, and even now, standing among them, visitors describe feeling remarkably small beneath their silent, weathered height. Aksum also minted its own coins, in gold, silver, and bronze, stamped with the images of its kings, a mark of real economic sophistication shared by very few kingdoms anywhere in the world at that time. And in the 4th century, Aksum did something that would shape its identity for the next 1700 years and beyond. Its king, a young ruler named Ezana, converted to Christianity, making Aksum one of the very first kingdoms anywhere on earth, and the first major state in Africa to adopt Christianity as its official religion, Only shortly after the Roman Empire itself began to do the same. This was not a faith imposed from outside and then abandoned. It took deep and lasting root. Later centuries would see the extraordinary rock-hewn churches of Lalibela carved directly downward into solid volcanic stone. Entire buildings excavated out of the living rock rather than built up from the ground, complete with windows, doors, carved pillars, and connecting tunnels, created, according to tradition, under the direction of a king who wished to build a new Jerusalem in the African highlands for pilgrims who could not easily make the long journey to the original one. Ethiopian Christianity, nurtured from these Aksumite roots, would continue on as one of the oldest continuously practiced Christian traditions anywhere in the world, remarkably resilient through all the centuries that followed, carrying its own distinct saints, its own calendar, its own beautiful and haunting style of religious music and art. Aksum's story also carries a legend that Ethiopians have cherished for generations, the tale of the Queen of Sheba, who is remembered in Ethiopian tradition as a wise and powerful ruler who traveled north to meet King Solomon of Israel, and who returned home carrying his child. That child, tradition holds, became the founder of a royal line that would claim descent from Solomon himself, a line of kings that some later dynasties in Ethiopia would trace themselves back to, all the way into the 20th century. Whether every detail of that old story reflects literal historical fact is a question historians still turn over gently, but the legend itself became a real and lasting part of how Ethiopians understood their own identity and their own ancient dignity. Over time, changing trade routes, the rise of new powers in Arabia, and shifts in climate slowly reduced Aksum's wealth and influence, and its great days as a Red Sea trading empire gradually faded. But its cultural and religious legacy did not fade with it. The highland kingdoms that followed Aksum, all the way down through the centuries, continue to see themselves as heirs to its Christian tradition and its proud, independent African identity, an identity that would later allow Ethiopia to stand, almost alone among African nations, as a kingdom that successfully resisted European colonization when so much of the rest of the continent did not. But that chapter of resistance is still a long way ahead of us in our story tonight. For now, rest your eyes on those tall, silent stone stelae, standing watch in the highland evening light, and let yourself drift for a moment into the scent of frankincense smoke curling up toward a darkening sky, exactly as it has for nearly 2,000 years. We still have so very far to travel together, my friend, west across deserts and south through forests, and further still through centuries yet to come. Rest now just a little longer before we continue. Chapter 5. The Empire of Ancient Ghana. Let us cross now, my friend, all the way to the other side of the continent, west across the widening bulge of Africa, to the edge of the Great Sahara Desert, where golden dunes give way, almost magically, to the dry grasslands the geographers call the Sahel. This word Sahel comes from an old Arabic term meaning shore, or coast, because to travelers crossing the endless sand of the Sahara, reaching this belt of grass and scattered trees must have felt exactly like a tired sailor finally reaching land. And it was here, along this shore of the desert sea, that a series of remarkable trading empires rose up, one after another, each larger and richer than the one before. The earliest and most famous of these was the empire its own people called Wagadu, though the wider world came to know it by another name, Ghana, borrowed from the title of its rulers. Do take a moment to notice, my friend, that this ancient empire of Ghana sat far to the northwest of the modern nation that carries its name today, in what is now Mauritania and Mali, a naming choice made many centuries later, in the 20th century, when a newly independent nation chose to honor this old and glorious memory by adopting its name. Ancient Ghana rose to greatness by sitting astride one of the most valuable trade routes the world has ever known, the routes that carried gold north across the Sahara and salt south into the forests and grasslands below. This exchange gave rise to a saying, recorded by Arab travelers who visited the region and marveled at what they saw, that the king of Ghana was so wealthy in gold that even his hunting dogs wore collars of gold, and that he could arm his entire army with weapons made of the same precious metal if he ever chose to. The gold itself came from mines far to the south, in the forested regions near the Senegal and Niger rivers, brought north by traders who guarded the exact location of their gold fields with tremendous secrecy. A famous and curious form of trade grew up around this gold, one that travelers called the silent trade. Salt traders would arrive from the north with their goods, lay them out along the riverbank, then withdraw out of sight and beat a large drum to signal that they were ready to deal. Gold traders would then approach, examine the salt, and leave what they judged to be a fair amount of gold beside it before withdrawing themselves. The salt traders would then return, and if they found the gold acceptable, they would take it and leave, but if not, they would withdraw again without touching it, until eventually, through this careful, wordless negotiation, both sides settled on a price that satisfied everyone, all without a single word ever being exchanged, and remarkably, without either side ever seeing the other's face. The capital city of ancient Ghana, a place called Kumbai-Sao, grew into a bustling and cosmopolitan center, home, according to the accounts of Arab geographers who visited and wrote about it, to two distinct towns standing about 6 miles apart, one where the king lived surrounded by his own religious traditions and sacred groves, and another populated largely by Muslim traders from North Africa, complete with its own mosques, its own scholars, and its own busy marketplaces selling goods from across the known world. This arrangement allowed the kingdom to benefit fully from Islamic trade networks stretching all the way to Baghdad and beyond, while the king himself, for many generations, kept to the traditional religious practices of his own ancestors, a thoughtful balance between old ways and new opportunities. The King of Ghana ruled with genuine ceremony and majesty. Arab visitors described elaborate royal audiences, the king seated beneath a golden pavilion, surrounded by richly dressed attendants, horses draped in gold cloth, and loyal officials standing ready to advise him on matters of law and trade. Justice in the kingdom was taken with great seriousness, and the empire maintained enough order and security along its trade routes that merchants felt confident enough to travel great distances carrying valuable goods, trusting that the king's authority would protect them along the way. This kind of trust, quietly built and carefully maintained over generations, is itself one of the great achievements of any lasting civilization, and it is easy to overlook simply because it leaves behind no dramatic monument, only the steady, patient prosperity of merchants who kept coming back, year after year, because they knew they could rely on the roads being safe. Gold from this ancient trade eventually made its way north across the desert, into the markets of North Africa, and from there into the hands of Mediterranean merchants, and from there, remarkably, into the coinage of medieval Europe itself. Historians have suggested that a very substantial share of the gold circulating in the entire medieval world, coins used in markets from Cairo to Venice to Baghdad, may ultimately trace its origin back to the gold fields of West Africa, carried across the Sahara on the backs of patient camels, one dusty caravan at a time. It is a humbling thought, my friend, that the wealth glittering in far-off medieval cities so often had its true beginning in the quiet river valleys of West Africa, among people whose names have mostly been lost to us now, simple miners and traders going about their daily work, never imagining how far their gold would travel. Ancient Ghana's power endured for several centuries, but by around the 11th century, a combination of pressures, including drought that made farming and grazing more difficult, shifting trade routes, and rising rival powers began to weaken the empire. Eventually, its authority faded, and the mantle of dominance over these lucrative trans-Saharan trade routes would pass to new empires rising further east along the Niger River, kingdoms we will meet very soon, whose wealth and fame would grow so great that stories of their splendor would eventually reach the royal courts of Europe itself. For now, though, let yourself imagine those golden collars glinting on hunting dogs in a royal courtyard, the patient rhythm of camel caravans crossing dune after endless dune, and the quiet drumbeat beside a riverbank, calling gold traders forward to examine salt they could not yet see the sellers of. Rest here a while longer, my friend, in the shimmering heat of the Sahel, before we travel onward, deeper still into the story of West Africa's Golden Age. Chapter 6: Mali and the Golden Pilgrimage. As the power of ancient Ghana slowly faded, my friend, a new empire rose in its place, further east along the great bend of the Niger River, an empire that would grow even larger, even richer, and even more famous across the wider world. This was the Mali Empire, and its story begins, as so many great stories do, with a struggle against a tyrant. According to the oral tradition still lovingly recited today by West African storytellers called griots, keepers of history and memory passed down through spoken word across countless generations, the Mali Empire was founded by a prince named Sundiata Keita. As a child, Sundiata was weak and could not even walk, mocked by rivals at court who saw him as no threat at all. But through sheer determination, and the old stories say, through the guidance of powerful protective magic, he eventually rose to his feet, grew strong, and after years of exile, returned to defeat a cruel sorcerer king who had seized control of his homeland. This dramatic tale, called the Epic of Sundiata, is still recited today, sung across the generations by griots, and it remains one of the great epic tales of world literature, ranked by many alongside the Iliad or the Odyssey in its scope, its drama, and its lasting cultural importance. Under Sundiata and the rulers who followed him, Mali grew into a vast empire, stretching at its height across a huge swath of West Africa, controlling the crucial trade routes that carried gold north and salt south, exactly as Ghana had before it, but on an even grander scale. Mali's wealth came not only from gold but also from control over the fertile farmlands along the Niger, and from taxing and organizing the trade that flowed through its territory. But of all Mali's rulers, one in particular remains etched into world history with a kind of golden glow, a king named Mansa Musa, who came to the throne in the early 14th century. Mansa Musa was, by the careful estimates of modern historians who have tried to calculate such things, quite possibly the wealthiest individual human being who has ever lived. His fortune so vast, drawn from gold mines under his control, that it becomes difficult even now to translate into any modern currency in a way that feels entirely real. In the year 1324, Mansa Musa did something that would make his name echo across continents for centuries to come. As a devout Muslim, he set out on the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that is one of the 5 central obligations of the Islamic faith, and he did not travel quietly. His caravan, by various accounts, included many thousands of people, soldiers, officials, and servants, along with a great train of camels, and most famously, an enormous quantity of gold, carried along simply to be given away as gifts and used for expenses along the journey. As Mansa Musa's caravan passed through Cairo, he gave away gold so freely and so generously to the poor, to scholars, and to local rulers that he is said to have single-handedly disrupted the value of gold in Egyptian markets for years afterward, flooding the local economy with so much of the precious metal that its price actually dropped, an economic ripple effect still discussed by historians of medieval trade today. Word of this journey spread rapidly along trade networks stretching across the Islamic world and into Europe, and soon mapmakers in Spain and Italy were drawing a great African king, seated on a golden throne, holding a golden orb, right in the middle of their maps of the known world, on a famous chart called the Catalan Atlas, created in the year 1375, more than 50 years after his famous pilgrimage. and still remembered so vividly that his image was considered essential to include. When Mansa Musa returned home from Mecca, he brought with him something perhaps even more valuable than the gold he had given away: a renewed devotion to scholarship and architecture. He brought scholars and architects back to his empire, and under his patronage, the city of Timbuktu, already an important trading post on the edge of the Sahara, blossomed into one of the great centers of learning in the entire medieval world. Grand mosques were built there, including the famous Djinguereber Mosque, constructed from earth and wood in a distinctive West African architectural style that still stands today. Its walls dotted with wooden beams that serve both structural and decorative purposes and make it easy to perform the regular replastering the building needs after each rainy season. Timbuktu grew into a city of scholars, home to a university associated with the Sankore Mosque, where students and teachers gathered to study law, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and theology. Private libraries flourished throughout the city, and wealthy families took great pride in owning large collections of handwritten manuscripts, some of which, remarkably, survive even today, carefully preserved by families who protected them through centuries of change, and even in more recent times, hid them from those who might have destroyed them during periods of conflict. A popular saying from that era captured the city's reputation vividly, declaring that salt comes from the north, gold from the south, and silver from the country of the white men. But the word of God and the treasures of wisdom are only to be found in Timbuktu. Traders and travelers from North Africa and the Middle East who visited Mali described a land of remarkable order and safety. One famous traveler, Ibn Battuta, who journeyed further and more widely across the medieval world than perhaps any other individual of his time, visited Mali some years after Mansa Musa's reign and wrote admiringly of the empire's justice system, noting that travelers could cross the realm without fear of theft or violence, a level of security he found remarkable compared to many other places he had visited across his extraordinary decades of travel. Like all empires, Mali's dominance would not last forever. In the centuries after Mansa Musa, internal succession struggles, along with the rising strength of a vassal state to the east, gradually weakened the empire's grip on the vital trade routes it had once controlled so completely. But its legacy endured in the memory of West Africa, in the epic songs of the griots, in the mud-brick mosques of Timbuktu still standing today, and in the enduring image, drawn so long ago on a European map, of a king so wealthy that gold seemed to flow from his very hands. Rest now, my friend, and picture that great golden caravan moving slowly across the desert toward Mecca, camel bells softly ringing, gold catching the desert sun. We will travel next to the empire that rose after Mali, one that would grow even larger still, before we continue our journey to other corners of this vast and endlessly fascinating continent. Chapter 7: Songhai, the largest empire West Africa ever knew. Rest a little deeper now, my friend, as we follow the great Niger River further along its patient bend, to the lands of a people called the Songhai, whose small kingdom, centered around the river city of Gao, had existed quietly for centuries, first as an independent state, and later as a vassal paying tribute to the mighty empire of Mali. But history, as we have already seen, rarely stays still for long, and in time, Songhai's moment arrived. The man remembered as the true architect of Songhai's greatness was a ruler named Sani Ali, who came to power in the middle of the 15th century, and who spent almost the whole of his long reign on horseback, leading military campaigns that expanded his kingdom's borders in every direction. He was a bold and often ruthless commander, remembered in some traditions with a certain uneasy awe, a leader whose military genius could not be denied even by those who found his methods harsh. Under his leadership, Songhai captured the great trading cities of Timbuktu and Djen, seizing for itself the very trade routes and centers of learning that had once made Mali so wealthy and so famous. After Sani Ali's death, a general named Askia Muhammad rose to power, founding a new ruling dynasty and steering the empire in a somewhat different direction, one that emphasized Islamic scholarship and administration even more strongly than his predecessor had. Askia Muhammad reorganized the empire into a series of provinces, each governed by an appointed official answerable to the central government, created specialized ministries to oversee trade, agriculture, and the military, and standardized weights and measures across the realm to make trade fairer and more predictable. He also made his own pilgrimage to Mecca, traveling with a magnificent escort and a great deal of gold, following in the tradition Mansa Musa had set nearly 2 centuries before, and he returned home with religious scholars and legal experts who helped strengthen Islamic learning and law throughout Songhai. Under Askia Muhammad and his successors, Timbuktu reached what many historians consider the very height of its intellectual golden age. The Sankore Mosque and its associated schools attracted students from across West Africa and beyond, and its scholars corresponded with, and were respected by, intellectual centers as far away as Cairo and the cities of the Arabian Peninsula. Manuscripts produced in Timbuktu during this era covered an extraordinary range of subjects, including astronomy, in which scholars carefully tracked the movements of stars and planets, medicine, including detailed treatises on treating various ailments, and Islamic law, philosophy, and history, much of it written by African scholars whose names and works remain far too little known in the wider world even today, though dedicated historians and librarians continue working to change that, preserving and translating these old manuscripts so their knowledge is not lost. At its height, Songhai was the largest empire West Africa had ever seen, larger even than Mali had been at the peak of Mansa Musa's reign, stretching across a vast expanse of the Sahel and controlling nearly all the major trans-Saharan trade routes. Its markets bustled with merchants trading gold, salt, cola nuts, textiles, leather goods, and enslaved people as well. For it must be said honestly, my friend, that various forms of slavery, including the trans-Saharan slave trade carrying captives north across the desert, existed within and around these African empires long before European ships ever arrived on the Atlantic coast. This is a difficult truth, but an important one, and we will return to think about the full, complicated history of slavery in Africa a little later in our story, when European involvement dramatically transforms its scale and its horror into something the world had never seen before. Songhai's golden age, like every golden age we have visited so far, eventually came to an end, and it ended suddenly and dramatically. In the year 1591, a Moroccan army, sent across the vast Sahara by a sultan eager to control the region's gold and salt trade, arrived at the banks of the Niger River. Remarkably, this Moroccan force, though much smaller in number than the Songhai army that opposed it, carried an advantage that changed the outcome entirely. They carried gunpowder weapons, muskets and small cannons, of a kind Songhai's traditional cavalry and infantry had never faced in battle before. At a battle near a place called Tondabai, the Moroccan force, despite being vastly outnumbered, used these firearms to devastating effect, and Songhai's grand imperial army, brave as it was, could not withstand this new and terrifying kind of warfare. The fall of Songhai marked, in many ways, the end of the great trading empire era in West Africa's Sahel region, a period stretching back over 6 centuries through Ghana, Mali, and Songhai in turn. The Moroccan conquerors found that ruling such a vast and distant territory across the desert was far harder than conquering it, and their control gradually fragmented into smaller successor states over the following decades. Timbuktu itself, though it would never again reach quite the same heights of wealth and scholarly fame, continued on as an important town, its old manuscripts quietly preserved in family libraries through centuries of change that followed, waiting patiently, much like Africa's history itself so often has, for the wider world to eventually take proper notice again. Rest now, my friend, in the shade of Timbuktu's old mud-brick libraries, surrounded by the quiet scratching of pens on old paper, scholars bent over manuscripts by lamplight, discussing the movements of the stars. We have traveled far already tonight, through deserts and along great rivers, but there is still an entire continent left to explore. Forests and coastlines and mountains and grasslands, each with its own kingdoms, its own wonders, and its own long, patient history. Sleep a little deeper now if you can, and we will continue soon. Chapter 8: Great Zimbabwe and the Kingdoms of the South. Let us drift now, my friend, far to the south and east, away from the Sahel and its golden caravans, down toward the high plateau country between the Zambezi and Limpopo rivers, in what is now the nation of Zimbabwe. Here, beginning around the 11th century and reaching its greatest heights between the 13th and 15th centuries, a remarkable civilization built something unlike anything else in the region. A great stone city rising from the grassy hills, constructed without any mortar at all. Its granite blocks fitted together so precisely, so carefully, that the walls have stood for many centuries since, through sun and rain and wind, without crumbling. This place came to be called Great Zimbabwe, and the word Zimbabwe itself comes from a phrase in the Shona language meaning houses of stone, a fitting name for a city whose massive curved walls, some of them over 30 feet high and constructed from nearly 1 million individual granite blocks, still leave visitors quietly amazed today. At its height, Great Zimbabwe was home to perhaps as many as 20,000 people, making it one of the largest urban centers in the entire region at that time, larger than London was during parts of the same period. The city's wealth, much like Ghana and Mali far to the north, rested on trade, though here the key resources were gold and ivory rather than the trans-Saharan salt trade. Gold mined from the surrounding hills, along with ivory from the region's abundant elephant herds, traveled along trade routes east to the Indian Ocean coast, where it was exchanged for goods arriving from as far away as China, India, and Persia. Archaeologists excavating Great Zimbabwe have found Persian pottery, Chinese porcelain, and glass beads from India, tangible proof that this inland African city was fully connected to the great trading networks crisscrossing the Indian Ocean, networks that linked the interior of southern Africa to the wider medieval world in ways that many people, even today, do not fully realize. At the heart of the city stood a structure archaeologists call the Great Enclosure, a massive walled compound whose exact original purpose remains debated, though many believe it served ceremonial functions connected to kingship and perhaps to rites of passage for young royals coming of age. Within its walls stands a mysterious solid conical tower, built for reasons no surviving record fully explains, standing quietly today just as it has for roughly 6 centuries, keeping its secrets. Soapstone carvings of birds, found throughout the ruins and believed to have held deep spiritual significance, were so treasured by the society that later found and studied them that one now appears on the flag of modern Zimbabwe, a direct and proud link between this ancient city and the modern nation that eventually took its name in tribute. Great Zimbabwe eventually declined, likely due to some combination of overgrazing, deforestation, exhausted local resources, and shifting trade routes, sometime around the 15th century, and its people moved on to found new kingdoms nearby, including the Kingdom of Mutapa, which inherited much of Great Zimbabwe's trading wealth and continued to command respect, and eventually, cautious trading relationships with Portuguese merchants who arrived on the coast in later centuries. For a very long time, unfortunately, European colonial authorities who encountered the ruins of Great Zimbabwe in the 19th century refused to believe that African people could have built something so sophisticated, and they promoted absurd theories crediting the site to Phoenicians, or the biblical Queen of Sheba, or almost anyone other than the ancestors of the very people still living in the region. It took the careful, patient work of archaeologists across the 20th century to firmly and thoroughly establish what should have been obvious all along, that Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of the Shona people, a proud achievement of African civilization and African engineering, requiring no outside explanation at all. Rest now, my friend, among those quiet stone walls, curving gently across the grassy hillside, gold and ivory and glass beads once passing hands within them, the murmured business of an old and confident kingdom carried on the evening breeze. Our journey now turns toward the coast, my friend, to the sea, and to cities where Africa met the wide waters of the Indian Ocean. Chapter 9: The Swahili Coast. Imagine now, my friend, a long, warm coastline stretching for well over 1,000 miles, from Somalia in the north down through Kenya and Tanzania, and into Mozambique in the south, where the land meets the blue waters of the Indian Ocean. For more than 1,000 years, this coast has been home to a unique and vibrant civilization, born from the meeting of African peoples and traders arriving by sail from Arabia, Persia, and India, all drawn together by the rhythm of the monsoon winds, which blow reliably from one direction for half the year, and then reverse to blow from the other direction for the rest, allowing ancient sailors to travel out to Africa on one wind and safely return home months later on the other. Out of this long meeting of peoples grew the Swahili civilization, and with it, the Swahili language itself, a rich Bantu language enriched over centuries with many borrowed Arabic words, still spoken today by well over 100 million people across East Africa, one of the most widely spoken languages on the entire continent. All along this coast, independent city-states rose to prosperity, each with its own ruling family, its own fleet of trading ships, and its own particular flavor of Swahili culture, though all connected by shared language, shared Islamic faith, and the shared rhythm of the trading seasons. Kilwa, on an island off the coast of what is now Tanzania, grew into one of the wealthiest and most magnificent of these city-states, controlling for a time the crucial gold trade flowing north from Great Zimbabwe and the southern interior. When the great Muslim traveler Ibn Battuta visited Kilwa in the 14th century, during roughly the same era Mansa Musa was making his own famous pilgrimage far to the west, he described it as one of the most beautiful and well-built towns in the world, praising its elegant stone buildings, several stories high, built from coral stone quarried from the sea itself, and cut with such skill that the resulting structures still stand today, weathered but recognizable, along the ruins of the old town. Further north, the city of Mombasa grew into another great trading hub, along with Malindi, and the island town of Lamu, whose old stone town, with its narrow, winding streets too tight for cars even now, continues to preserve much of its old Swahili character into the present day. Merchants in these cities traded gold, ivory, and, sadly, enslaved people, moving them out to markets across the Indian Ocean world, alongside more everyday goods like mangrove timber, used for construction as far away as the treeless regions of the Arabian Peninsula, and they received in return porcelain from China, cloth from India, and glass beads and glazed pottery from Persia. The rulers of these coastal cities built elaborate mosques and palaces, and left behind inscriptions and coins that allow historians today to trace the rise and fall of individual trading dynasties along the coast, family by family, across many centuries. A curious and marvelous artifact of this trade still survives today in China, where the Imperial Museum holds records and depictions of a giraffe brought as an extraordinary diplomatic gift from the East African coast during the early 15th century, delivered by the enormous treasure fleet of the great Chinese Admiral Zheng He, whose ships visited the Swahili coast on more than one occasion, and whose gift caused quite a sensation at the Chinese imperial court, where the tall, gentle, spotted creature was mistaken by some courtiers for the mythical unicorn-like Qilin of Chinese legend. Everything changed for the Swahili coast at the very end of the 15th century, when Portuguese ships, sailing around the southern tip of Africa in search of a sea route to the riches of India, began arriving along this coastline for the very first time. Vasco da Gama's fleet stopped at several Swahili ports on its famous voyage, and the Portuguese, recognizing the enormous wealth flowing through these Indian Ocean trade networks, soon returned with warships. Determined to seize control of this lucrative trade for themselves, rather than simply participate peacefully in it as earlier traders always had. Kilwa, Mombasa, and other cities were attacked, looted, and in some cases occupied by Portuguese forces over the following decades, a grim early preview of the far larger wave of European intervention that would eventually reshape the entire African continent. Yet Swahili culture, resilient as the coral stone its cities were built from, did not disappear. Trading families adapted, some cities eventually reasserted degrees of independence, and Swahili language, architecture, cuisine, and customs continued to develop and flourish along this coast right through the centuries that followed, and remain vibrantly alive today, in the call to prayer echoing over Zanzibar's old stone town, in the taste of coconut and cardamom in coastal cooking, and in the graceful, carved wooden doors that still mark the entrances to old coastal homes, from Lamu to Mozambique Island. Rest now, my friend, and listen for the creak of old dhow sailboats rocking gently in a warm harbor, their triangular sails furled for the night, waiting for the next monsoon wind to carry them, and their cargo of ivory, gold, and cloth, onward across the wide, dark, star-filled waters of the Indian Ocean. Chapter 10. The Kingdom of Congo in Central Africa. Let us travel now, my friend, down the western coast of the continent, south of the great rainforest basin, to the mouth of the mighty Congo River, wide and powerful enough to push fresh water many miles out into the salty Atlantic Ocean before it finally mixes with the sea. Here, by around the 14th century, a sophisticated kingdom had grown up, one its own people called the Kingdom of Congo, ruled by a king known as the Manikongo, from a capital city called Mbanza Congo, perched on a cool, breezy hilltop in what is now northern Angola. Congo was a well-organized state, divided into provinces each governed by appointed officials answerable to the king, supported by a currency of small seashells called Nzimbu, gathered from a specific royal-controlled beach and used throughout the kingdom for everyday transactions, a system that gave the crown real and direct control over the kingdom's money supply, in much the same way a modern central bank might. Skilled weavers in Congo produced beautiful raffia cloth, so finely woven that early Portuguese visitors compared it favorably to European velvet and damask, and blacksmiths worked copper and iron into tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects treasured throughout the region. In the year 1483, a Portuguese explorer named Diogo Cao became the first European to reach the Kingdom of Congo, arriving by ship at the mouth of the Great River. What followed was, at least at first, a relationship of genuine mutual curiosity and diplomatic exchange, rather than immediate conquest. The reigning king, and especially his son and eventual successor, who took the baptized name Afonso I after converting to Catholicism, embraced elements of Portuguese culture, religion, and technology with real enthusiasm, sending Congolese nobles to Portugal to be educated, corresponding directly and at length with the King of Portugal as a fellow monarch, and even seeing his own son ordained as a Catholic bishop in Rome. One of the very first sub-Saharan African bishops in the history of the Catholic Church. King Afonso worked to build Congo into a centralized Christian kingdom that could engage with Europe as a respected equal, and for some years, this vision seemed genuinely within reach. But the relationship curdled painfully over time, as Portuguese traders and colonists increasingly pursued the capture and purchase of enslaved people from Congo and its neighboring regions to sell across the Atlantic, a trade that grew so large and so disruptive that it began to destabilize Congolese society from within, fueling wars between rival factions eager to capture captives for sale, undermining the very royal authority that Afonso had worked so hard to strengthen. Afonso himself wrote anguished letters to the King of Portugal, pleading with him to restrain his own merchants, describing how the insatiable demand for enslaved people was tearing his kingdom apart, corrupting his nobles, and emptying his lands of people. Letters that survive today as some of the most powerful and heartbreaking first-hand African accounts we have of the early Atlantic slave trade's devastating human cost, written by a king watching his own kingdom unravel in real time. Despite these hardships, the Kingdom of Congo persisted for centuries, its Christian identity blending in fascinating ways with older Congolese spiritual traditions, producing a distinctive Congolese Christianity that would later travel, carried in the minds and memories of enslaved Congolese people transported across the Atlantic, into the religious practices of the Americas, leaving lasting traces in Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Brazilian spiritual traditions that endure to this day. A quiet, resilient thread connecting Central Africa to the Americas across the terrible Middle Passage. Elsewhere across Central Africa, other kingdoms rose in these same centuries, including the Cuba Kingdom, renowned across the region for its extraordinarily refined art, its finely carved wooden sculptures, and its intricately patterned raffia textiles, considered among the most sophisticated and beautiful the African continent has ever produced, and the Luba and Lunda kingdoms further east, which developed elaborate political systems for governing large, ethnically diverse territories. Systems of appointed chiefs and titled officials that other kingdoms across the wider region would later study, and in some cases, deliberately imitate. Rest now, my friend, and think of a hilltop city, cool breezes moving through it, cloth as soft as velvet drying in the sun, a king writing careful letters by candlelight, hopping against hope that a distant monarch across the ocean might still listen to his plea. There is sorrow in this part of our story, my friend, real sorrow, but there is also always resilience, and it is that resilience we will carry forward with us as our journey continues.